what's your thoughts on this model on a global basis? And how do you guys think about this? If this really starts to scale, I mean, we're still in the early innings of this game. You guys are doing great. You know, you've got good funding behind you too. How do you think about, can this model work across the entire world, and what's your philosophy there? Do you think it's best just to focus on the US markets similar to the US, or do you think there's a model here where you need to get this somehow like an Uber, you know, or an Airbnb everywhere?
So I think conceptually the value we're offering to customers and through our product, and the value we're offering to investors can very easily be extrapolated to other markets across the globe. I think in terms of our business expansion, it's tough to say it makes sense once we're up and running in a few markets to then say, okay, let's go international. Because I've worked in European real estate for several years, and it's amazing how different each market is, just in terms of fundamentals and how people access, but also from a regulatory standpoint. The way that actually the landlord and renter relationship works, and really the home buying process, the norms, et cetera. The approach to an international market would be vastly, vastly different than the approach to a new domestic market. So I think there's potential for the requirement of a different product. I think the value proposition is exactly the same that we're offering, and the concept is there. It would be perhaps a different product, like what Ben started speaking about when we first were describing the phase of the company and what product works to fit people. But the concept is there.
Got it.
I do think this would. So I'm actually from Hong Kong. I immigrated to the United States about 7 years ago, and this issue of like not being able to afford a home because of a down payment is very much prevalent in Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong per square foot is even more expensive than New York. You hear of all these articles where people live in these like micro apartments that are like the size of a closet and like have no windows and what have you. And I speak to my parents about this quite frequently. They actually often encourage me, like, hey, I mean, partly they want me to come back to Hong Kong, but they're always saying like, hey, you should bring this concept to Hong Kong. I think it'd have great traction. I think like there'd be a ton of people out here that would like it. There's a lot of like billionaire real estate investors that are also philanthropists that would love to help the community. So I do think and outside of Hong Kong, obviously this issue of not being able to being locked out of home ownership is obviously a problem. To some degree, I actually think that this might have even more impact outside the U.S. because the U.S. is a country where it's one of the few countries where you just get so over leveraged from like buying a house, right? Like what other country has a mortgage program that allows you to borrow up to 97% of home value? It's crazy. Like when I talk about that with some of my European or Asian friends, they say that's insane. Like how can you be that leveraged? And so obviously that makes the down payment even a bigger hurdle, like even more of a hurdle, right? Like if here you only need 3%. Imagine in countries where you need 30% or 40% of the home as a down payment. So I think there's a lot of potential for this internationally, and I think the sooner we can become this platform model, like the more likely it is of our chances that we become more of a global company.
I see.
But we're very far off from that.
I get it. So going back to something we discussed earlier then, it sounds like you want to be the platform. You don't necessarily want to create a side business and make that the focus where you're buying real estate and you're a tech-enabled real estate fund. Sounds like you truly want to be the platform. Is that fair to say from my interpretation here?
I wouldn't say that our end goal is to be there. It's obviously a very attractive one because it just removes this removes this component of having to go and have a separate fund raising money. But I think like if sometime in the future we become that, it would be a really interesting shift in our business that would make us much more scalable. Because like the main thing limiting our capacity to grow, right, is the amount of real estate we're able to acquire. And that itself has a lot of risk, right? Like there's balance sheet risk holding a lot of real estate. So, if there's a path where we eventually become this platform, it could be very interesting. I wouldn't say like we're definitively saying this is the only way forward, but it's something we've talked about a lot. we'd love to somewhat explore.
And Ben, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I actually am one of the few people, probably in venture capital, who believes it is powerful to own the asset outright. It depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to a VC, it's be a platform. We don't like the idea that you have to own the underlying asset. If you're talking to a private equity person, and I wear that hat because I buy real estate, right? I think it's awesome to own the underlying asset. Every fraction of a return you can get on, even a slight basis point improvement translates to a huge amount of valuation increase. If you can squeeze more juice out, if you can improve the quality of the tenant, why not, right? So it depends who you talk to, and it looks like a lot of PropTech startups grapple with this, and many go down the route of setting up a separate fund focused on acquisition, because then you remove the headache of trying to get customers and you have more control, but also at the core, powering everything through a platform and technology. So how did you go and find the right type of investors? You guys have assembled a great group of backers behind you at around $10 million plus. So who are some of your investors and how did you solicit them?
I can talk a little bit on the VC side. It was mostly my co-founder Michael did a lot of the fundraising, but we started off with an investment. Obviously we did a small friends and family round and our seed round, raised a bit of money. That led to an introduction to Ankur from Kairos Capital, who was one of our first angel investors. And he then introduced us to Evan from Coastlet Ventures. He previously founded DoorDash and then was a founding member of Open Door, I believe. So he put it. So Coastlet Ventures led our seed round, and then about 18 months later, we were then introduced to Keith Raboy from Founders Fund. And it was a very, I guess in the fundraising process, it's sort of always been going on. Like we frequently have conversations with investors. We like to sort of just have this very long list of people that we're in touch with, and we just build relationships with it over a long period of time. I think transparency and communication was like extremely important for us. Like we proactively scheduled weekly calls with our investors, which is important. So, we were transparent about what we failed at, what we were good at. And it led to a lot of trust being built. And it also led to a lot of, advice, from our investors. I think frequently in a lot of VC relationships, it's like, you just receive the money and then you're like, okay, see you later. See you in like 2 years and we need more money.
So you're talking here specifically about your current investors. So what you're saying is when you raised capital, you were proactive to the point where you were having weekly calls. Is that what you said?
That's right. We were having weekly calls and being very open about our failures and our successes. And it led to a lot of good advice. It led to more introductions. And we also started our Series A conversations quite early on. I mean, pretty much like a couple of months after our seed round, we already started conversations, not with a goal of obviously with the goal of raising money, but like the main goal was just to sort of get things going and just sort of seed this idea that, hey, we're a growing company and we're growing. When we do need funding, we should chat. So, it just over a period of time, it led to an investment from Founders Fund. Keith Raboy is very knowledgeable in this space. He quite liked what we were doing. So, yeah.
And how did you go about getting the first check for your first round of funding? Was that?
What do you mean?
It's very hard for PropTech startups to get the first check in, to get the first commitment. A lot of people want to sit around the table and wait, and it's an endless process, especially in PropTech. You guys did a great job. Were there any tips you could share?
Well, there's a lot of skin in the game, first of all. We personally put money in. We personally were involved in the first few, real estate deals. We actually, Michael actually has his name on the mortgage and the deed for a couple of our first few houses. So, I think similar to, when you're raising money from a PE fund, when they want you to have skin in the game,
right.
We showed our investors that, look, we're personally investing in these houses. We personally believe in these customers. If they default, we're personally on the hook. It's us that, get the house foreclosed on, or we have to fork with the money. So I think that built up a lot of trust. just showing how invested we were personally and just really believing in this concept, especially, since the first iteration, the product that we raised money on, which is the down payment assistance program, we'd actually personally done it ourselves. So we knew it worked to some degree. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you guys, you've referred to the company as HomeVest, we referred to it as Up&Up. Explain this duality here. How did you guys decide what to, how to rebrand?
Yeah, it's funny. We started with HomeVest because it was the name Michael had come up with before I'd met him. And we had a lot of disagreements over whether we should stick with that. Obviously, HomeVest is not a super original name. Like if you Google it, you'll see quite a lot of different HomeVests, especially this one in Florida, this property management company that has like really terrible reviews that people keep confusing us with. But we started off there because we're not the most, I guess, creative people when it comes to name creation. And so we just kind of stuck with it. We thought like, look, we can always change a name later. This is not an important problem. Let's go get product market fit first. And early testing suggested that customers, like the name, it just resonated. It's very memorable. Obviously, the big problem is there's a lot of different other other home vests out there. So yeah, we changed the name to Up&Up last year sometime when one of the bigger home vests actually reached out to us. I don't want to get too into specifics, but they reached out to us and said, "Hey, look, you're violating our trademark. You guys got to change your name." It was owned by a very large private equity fund that had billions of dollars, and we just didn't see the need to get into a protracted legal battle. So we thought, screw it. It's not like we've invested a ton of like brand equity and PR into this.
Yeah.
What's the harm in coming up with a new name? So yeah, we settled on Up&Up. We thought it was a very positive name. It's memorable. There were very few people out there that shared a similar name, and the domain name was kind of available. So here we are.
I love how pragmatic you are about this. I see far too many companies spend too long trying to figure out the perfect name, the perfect website design. You just have to be scrappy and move ahead. I did this for my company, Vungle. I always tell the story of how I literally gave 24 hours to come up with a name. And for all I cared, you could pick an object and a color, combine them together, right? Red door, black pen, right? Whatever it may be. I don't care. Let's just get a name, get a logo quickly, a template logo up. Let's go get product market fit and we'll figure it out later.
Right.
And we came up with Vungle in the end because it sounded like Google and it sounded like Video Jungle. And I was like, great, that sounds big, move ahead. Now, there's people listening to this podcast who completely disagree and think it's important to get the branding done right. You guys are an example of a company that wasn't necessarily married to the name to start with. You were forced to change the name quite further down the road. How painful was it to change? Was there any damage?
So one point I'd make is that branding is not just the name of the company. I think the branding was very intentional and people were careful. So I think that's one point where we're very intentional about the branding and the message and how we communicate with customers and how we come across as, like Ben was saying earlier, very fair. We want to build trust. We want to tell customers, that this isn't a good deal, right? We're happy to do that, even if that means we're not going to win that customer. And so I think the branding side of it and the customer communication and messaging and that customer education process is really important to us. I think the naming, on the other hand, was what was not as important up front. And there were headaches as we were going through that, process of changing. And obviously HomeVest still pops up here and there on internal documents. But I think from a customer standpoint, it was, relatively easy transition in that it was made, pretty early. And the large majority of our customers have been working with Up&Up from the start at this point. So it's really a small legacy of customers that were ever introduced to HomeVest.
Agreed, and I think when you dive into it, if you dive even deeper into branding, naming is only one part of branding, but branding at its core needs to be driven by core values. And it sounds like that really relates to product market fit too, making sure people have an amazing experience and you really deliver everything you say you're going to deliver on. But the name and the color scheme and the logo are things early on I don't think I have strong opinions. Of course I do, right? I think founders spend far too long fretting about this. It can change later on. And it always seems, difficult to change later on. I always found every time I brought in a new marketing leader or marketing person, they'd be like, "Hey, are you married to the name? Can we change it?" I'm like, "Stop focusing on the name. Get me more customers. That's what I want." So I'm a big fan of the pragmatic approach, but obviously I have a flavor, and there are many flavors of ways of doing things out there.
Everyone always has an opinion about the name. You can't please everyone. There's always someone out there that will say, "Oh, that's stupid. Change it to something else."
So, a question I have for you guys is, are there any other trends in prop tech? You're sitting in a unique position. You guys are out there pioneering a new home ownership model. You're constantly seeing and transacting on properties. Do you see other adjacent opportunities in prop tech that are exciting, or trends you think are going to underpin the future?
I think I'll maybe start with one adjacency that we like, that we just like working with. We like that it's there, and that's the one we spoke about earlier, which is iBuyers. And then maybe Ben can touch on some ancillary opportunities of, what we think a future state of the business or the product could be in terms of how we would capture, more of a customer's kind of time occupying a home or multiple homes. So regarding one prop tech that we love and are fascinated by is, iBuying and what Open Door has done. And we think they're, great disruptors in the space. And, watching them and learning from them, and we work with them as well, is a great way for us to think about how we transact on properties. They've found a way to not only grow their business very smartly, but also create a great product that, there's clearly huge demand for. And that's something that doesn't necessarily conflict with what we do. We'd love to see that trend continue, and we'd love to kind of, continue to work with them and learn from them as we have.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. And then, I would say this fractional ownership space is quite nascent. You have a bunch of startups out there that have, that have raised funding recently, like Divvy Homes, whatever, competitors. And then there's a bunch that have been out there for a while, like Unison, I think, in San Francisco. And then you have another one called Zero Down, which was started by the ex-Benefits guys. We're all sort of tackling the problem in a slightly different way. Or I guess we are also all tackling slightly different problems. I won't go into the specifics. I think that's a whole different conversation. But I think this fractional ownership space is quite interesting. As more people become more financially sophisticated and they start, being a bit more open-minded with experimenting with different, capital structures as regards real estate investing, I think you'll see, more consumer interest and more, institutional interest in getting involved. So that's one trend I see. I can also probably speak about trends in, some of the major issues we have with user acquisition would be things like underwriting. This has been a problem for many companies for a very, very long time, right? There's so many startups out there trying to improve the mortgage application process, right? There's so many different variants of documents you have to try to do it, and people send in pictures of their freaking bank statements and that are blurry. How do you solve stuff like that? So I think technology would get better at being able to underwrite people. I also think that matching, home matching algorithms, will get better and more sophisticated over time.
What does that mean? Home matching? What do you mean?
It's to do with how do you get a consumer to find the house that he's interested in, right? A consumer has an idea of this is the dream house that I want. How do you easily display that house to him and recommend other homes that he likes more easily, right? It's just effectively some sort of recommendation algorithm, right? It's difficult because, there's a lot of contextual information from pictures that, machines are not that great at picking up, right? And it very heavily depends on agents taking good pictures, first of all. So I think these are things that will get better over time. Hopefully we'll get to a place one day where, it's not a super manual process of me reviewing 1,000 street easy listings to find the house that I'm interested in, or 1,000 Zillow listings or whatever. So I think those are a couple of trends that I think will improve in the next few years.
Sure. What questions do you guys have for me? It could be as an entrepreneur who's built a company, or it could be as an investor, investing in startups across the board and, focusing on prop tech, or even as a real estate buyer. Do you guys want to pose any questions to me that you think might benefit the broader audience?
I guess I'm curious about your journey at Vungle. So a lot of people say that, building a startup is, it's like a journey through a very long tunnel where you barely see the light at the end. I'm curious whether there are any points, in building Vungle where you thought, oh shit, this isn't, sorry for the swear, like you thought, crap, this, we're in a really bad place. I'm worried about the company. I think we might have to shut down. Like, were there any moments where you thought, were there any very hairy moments where, you were able to turn around, and, what sort of, what kept you going, I guess?
You should rephrase the question, were there any moments where things were calm? Because it was a constant barrage of emotions. One day you think you're going to leave your mark on the universe and you're going to, you're going to disrupt Google and Facebook and you're going to be worth more than them. The next day you realize, oh my God, why do people invest in this? I'm terrified, like we're going to go to zero. There were many days where I literally thought we were going to go bankrupt. There were obviously fears that we have, and entrepreneurs tend to be quite paranoid, but then there were actual situations where those were defining moments for the company. I'll give you one quick example. And I would say luckily in PropTech, this isn't a problem, hopefully, that many PropTech companies will encounter, because there is no monopoly player in PropTech or in the real estate industry. Okay, you might argue and say the MLS might be in, San Francisco in the US real estate market. No, but what I mean is when I ran my company, we were putting video ads on mobile phones. Well, guess what? A large part of the audience in mobile phones have an Apple device. One day, we were doing really well. We'd raised our Series B. We were at this point, I don't know, tens of millions in revenue, somewhere between 20 to 50 million in revenue. We closed our Series B, and Apple decides to start rejecting any developer that uses the Vungle technology. Oh, wow. And initially I just saw it as, there must be something wrong with the developer's app. But then when we had 30 messages come in the space of a few hours, that's when I started to panic. And then I had a hard time sleeping that night, and I called up all the CEOs of my competitors, and no one seemed to take it seriously. 2 days in, at this point, we're having a board meeting and we're panicking. We're like, okay, potentially 70% of our revenue is going to go to zero because Apple is suddenly deciding to reject any developer that uses our tech. That was pretty scary, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, to get out of the tunnel, and this is what it comes to, if your unit economics are good and you solve a key problem, your company will survive, it will succeed. When people were not able to use the Vungle tech, their revenue started to drop as well. And that's when these developers, en masse, literally, got together and were pinging Apple, saying, why did you block Vungle's technology? We need it. We're unhappy with you. Eventually, Apple got in contact, apologized, and suddenly, one little flip of a switch at Apple and apps are suddenly live.
Wow.
And here we are.
Scary.
Ooh, that was very scary. And all I could do was to get in touch with customers, to encourage them to reach out, to create templates. It was all hands on deck moment in the company. Everyone from our CTO through to the person in charge of logo design to even contractors, like everyone get together and start calling our biggest customers, and I'll physically meet all our customers and work on this. So it lasted maybe, a week or so. And it was very terrifying. And, they didn't necessarily reach out to us and apologize. It was more like, oh, the policies have been changed. You're live now. It's like, okay, thank you. That's like, someone waiting to be executed and being told at the very last second, oh, it's been delayed. We're not going to tell you why. So, very terrifying.
Oh my gosh.
Many existential moments when you think your company's going to go to zero. You'll encounter that all the time.
It's a good story.
As long as you focus on unit economics from the beginning, then if your product is delivering value to customers, those customers will fight for you on your behalf. You don't have to do all the heavy lifting.
Right.
Do you think that changed the way? Do you think that changed the way you operated at times going forward to kind of anticipate that, or do you think it just gave you the confidence that if what you're doing works, you'll manage?
Well, specifically, the problem we had is that we were dependent on one very large monopoly player. So I was in a rush to diversify. I then started to prioritize the Android platform. We went out to operating systems all around the world, to China, and we tried to do, special deals with them. We did deals with Samsung, with Amazon, because I didn't want to be dependent on one source. Actually, early on, we had one big customer that was 80% of our revenues. And when they were no longer the number one app, our revenues plummeted. So when that first happened, I decided we're going to go and get the long tail of customers, and we're going to focus heavily on sales and retention. Then when we had all these customers, it was the platform issue, right? So diversification was important. It definitely changed. I didn't rest. I didn't get comforted. I didn't feel like, okay, nice, we lived to go eye to eye with Apple, the big giant, and we survived and we're now fine. It was like this giant could sneeze and would be dead. So we have to focus on, not being too dependent. And this happens all the time, honestly. Companies are very close with Apple or Google or Microsoft or Twitter, you name it. Insert big tech company worth, tens of billions of dollars or hundreds of billions, right? They are very close, but something happens. Maybe it's a decision made at, the top level, or some legal person changes the policy. And your own account manager at the large company is also caught unaware, and they're like, "Oh, we didn't realize this had happened. Sorry. Okay, good luck now. Bye-bye." And you're like, "Oh, we're sinking." So, yeah, it's pretty scary. And this is the nature of a startup, right? This is why startups can sometimes go to zero, and tech companies can as well. Although it's rare if you have a good diversified base.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One more question, actually, that's probably more specific to PropTech and conversations you have like this is, how do you think that, startup property technology companies or businesses like ours balance the need or the desire to be 100% tech, 100% automated, et cetera, with some of those core like real estate, fundamental experience or background that you need, right? Because some of these businesses actually require a lot of, technical background on the real estate side, let's say, or on the mechanical side, et cetera. So how do you see, companies balance that as they're building teams, et cetera?
Yeah, so that question is broken down into two different flavors, right? The first is how do you focus? The second is how do you hire a team? So on the focus side, actually having real estate context makes your technology do better, right? So it is very important to be the customer itself. So I definitely believe, for example, in your case, you guys will buy the homes as well as help consumers transact and be owners in the home, right? Doing that allows you to see things from a very unique perspective in a way a platform might miss. But when it comes to focus and effort, you have to make sure you don't build too deep a stack focused on home ownership for the sake of home ownership. It's like any product development or product management function. You have to prioritize. My advice would be to any startup that's in this conundrum of having to own the asset and be the tech platform, only build things that will scale and help the tech overall. Don't build these extra bells and whistles that make you a better asset owner. If your focus and differentiation is on the tech platform, any features you build on the home ownership side or asset ownership side should be complementary and help scale. This problem also applies to companies who have one large customer or two large customers. When you build features for that large customer, don't be a dev shop, don't be a consultancy firm. Make sure that the products you're building scale across the entire spectrum for the market, that you're strategic in your choice. I'd say for the hiring side, it's pretty essential. I don't think the engineers necessarily need to have real estate experience working in real estate companies. A lot of technology is inherently scalable, right? There's off-the-shelf algorithms you can plug in. So I don't think it matters much on the engineering side. I think what matters is customer empathy. And if there's ways in your company you can expose your engineers and people that don't interact with customers to the customer base, that would be great. One thing we did when I ran my startup was we'd bring in customers and we'd do sort of a keynote talk or a panel talk, like an all hands conversation. And it was amazing. Engineers love to come in and be able to see the customers that use their products. We'd hold conferences. So that's one way to make sure you set context. On the sales side, that's pretty important. You can get away with it in some industries. In the industry we were in, we didn't want people that came from traditional advertising backgrounds, and we were disrupting that. We didn't like that industry. And it worked in the beginning, but later on we did need to hire people that understood the nuances. So early on in the journey of a startup, hire any hustler that you can. Try to find someone who's got some good real estate experience, but don't look for someone who's from the real estate industry who's a no person. Because you're trying to disrupt a mindset. You're not trying to disrupt an industry. You're trying to disrupt a mindset. Okay? Because in real estate, there's a large contingency of people that believe this is the way it has to be, and we're against technology. We just want to squeeze more dollars by doing what we do. Right? Find someone from that world that doesn't have that mindset. Someone that's frustrated. Then when they have a passion, they'll do really well on the sales side.